Donald Trump has just joined what is indisputably the most corrupt lawsuit in the history of American politics, and that's the subject I want to start with for this Q&A tonight. First, I want to make sure that people understand the basics of the lawsuit that we're going to be talking about, because it's complicated, it's historic, and it will be a major subject over the next week or 2 weeks in the news, and people will really want to understand what's going on, because this is one of those court cases, while it will not have the result for the Republican that Bush v. Gore had in 2000, and of that almost every attorney you speak to is absolutely certain, it will be a historic case, and as I said, a historically corrupt case that will live on in infamy in presidential politics in the same way that Bush v. Gore did after 2000. And Bush v. Gore lived on in infamy in the way that this Texas case will, no matter how it's resolved, but I think we know how it will be resolved, and it will not be in Donald Trump's favor. Bush v. Gore lives on in infamy because the justices in that case were so ashamed of their intervention in a presidential election that they did something any lawyer will tell you they've never seen before in any other case, which is that the justices in Bush v. Gore said, this case has no precedential value whatsoever. It should be ignored by all future lawyers, all future judges, all future litigants, and never cited as precedent for any proposition. The law is built upon precedent. It's built upon Supreme Court decisions that can be relied upon by future litigants, future lawyers, parties who don't take their case to the Supreme Court because they read Supreme Court holdings and they say, this is the lay of the land. That wasn't possible after Bush v. Gore. So let's first lay out the basic facts of the Texas lawsuit, and I'm going to go through some key items. Once I've done that, I will answer your questions, but there's a lot to say first about the basics, and those basics may answer a lot of your questions. For those wondering, this hat is a West Virginia Mountaineers hat. So I'll be calling this live chat, which is my fourth one, West Virginia Mountaineers, in case you want to come back to it later on. All right, so here's the basics of this Texas lawsuit that's going to consume the interest of the country for the next week or two. The Attorney General of the state of Texas, so this is a state official, not a federal official, is a man by the name of Ken Paxton. And Ken Paxton has sued the states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, and attempted to bring his case to the Supreme Court as an interstate case, a dispute between states, because Paxton, on behalf of the state of Texas, says that the states he's suing, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Georgia, changed their election protocols illegally in the run-up to the 2020 election. Specifically, he opines before the Supreme Court that there were changes in protocols with respect to mail-in ballots that were made by either chief executives, so governors in those 4 states, or judges made the decision regarding certain changes being made in election protocols. And so Ken Paxton, essentially building off of Bush v. Gore, which already tells you how meritless this lawsuit is, because Bush v. Gore was explicitly stated by that court in 2000 to have no precedential value, but basically building off of the principle of Bush v. Gore, Ken Paxton says it's an equal protection 14th Amendment violation if states change their protocols without a legislature having been the one to make those changes in the lead up to an election. Now, since he filed that lawsuit, it has been joined by the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Representing Donald Trump is a man named John Eastman, who is already infamous in the United States because in the run-up to the 2020 election, he fraudulently claimed, and in a racist way, indisputably racist, indisputably fraudulent, indisputably inaccurate as a matter of fact and law, that Kamala Harris was not entitled to become vice president of the United States, that she was in fact disqualified under the Constitution from assuming that position. It was an attempt to essentially invalidate, prior to the election, the Biden-Harris ticket. This man, John Eastman, was universally criticized, attacked, and frankly reviled within the legal community for his racist, baseless claim about Kamala Harris. You now have to wonder what sort of contact Donald Trump was in with John Eastman at the time he made that attempt, fraudulent attempt, to invalidate the Biden-Harris ticket so that Trump would win the election in 2020, because he's now Donald Trump's lawyer. Donald Trump has a very lengthy history of using people as informal legal advisors. He did this with Joe DeGeneva, did it with Victoria Tonsing, did it with Rudy Giuliani. He's basically done it with everyone who's ever been a formal lawyer of his. At some point, they have advised him informally. Michael Cohen, the list goes on and on. So we don't know if Trump was in touch with John Eastman as an informal legal advisor when he wrote what he wrote about Kamala Harris. But it's not only Donald Trump who's joined this corrupt lawsuit, and you're going to hear in just a moment why I call it corrupt, because it's based on facts, widely reported, major media investigative reporting that's going to knock your socks off. It's now been joined by 17 states. 17 states have joined Texas and the president in an attempt to overturn the democratic results of an election in the United States on corrupt, fraudulent grounds. Here are the states. I'm going to read off a list because I don't have it memorized. The states that have joined this Texas lawsuit are Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, and unfortunately, the state whose hat I'm wearing right now for its university, West Virginia. So that's 18 states in total. Let me start in explaining this lawsuit to you by telling you something about Ken Paxton, the state official, the Attorney General of Texas, who filed this suit. And I will note, filed it almost exclusively on his own, with him handling the case effectively himself, which is not something attorneys general do. They actually don't often appear in court. They don't take the lead on cases. They have many, many assistant attorneys general who do that work for them. So it's already very strange that he's handling the case himself. But let's put that aside, and let me tell you what happened to Ken Paxton in 2015. In 2015, Ken Paxton was indicted for securities fraud in the state of Texas, a state offense, not a federal offense. Under that state offense, which is still pending. So Ken Paxton, every time you hear his name over the next week or two, understand he is currently under indictment for fraud in the state of Texas, where he is facing 99 years in prison. Let me repeat that. Donald Trump's friend, who filed this lawsuit in Texas, Ken Paxton, files this lawsuit while under indictment for securities fraud in Texas and facing 99 years of incarceration if convicted. Despite the fact that this happened in 2015, in 2018, he ran for Attorney General. Donald Trump endorsed him. They're friends. Ken Paxton has bragged about their friendly relationship and the fact that the president calls him frequently and in fact calls him at home. Donald Trump's endorsement of Ken Paxton in 2018 was probably dispositive, a legal term meaning determinative, of Ken Paxton's success in the 2018 Attorney General election, because Ken Paxton won in 2018, perhaps because he was under indictment for securities fraud and facing 99 years in state prison. He won with only 50.6% of the vote. So Ken Paxton owes his position as Attorney General, almost certainly, to the endorsement of Donald Trump, very popular in Texas at the time. And he files this case now. Well, what else has happened to Ken Paxton since 2018, since he squeaked by with Donald Trump's endorsement in the election of 2018? Well, here's what happened. 8 of his own deputies, not one of his deputies, not 2, not 4 or 5, 8 of his immediate deputies accused him of bribery and abuse of power. The same sort of fact patterns alleged against Donald Trump in the impeachment hearing and impeachment trial of January 2020. And there are, of course, impeachable offenses everywhere. They are felonies, and in this case, federal felonies. Those federal felonies, these 8 deputies of Paxton accused him of, just recently happened, are federal felonies currently being investigated by the FBI. So, Ken Paxton, under indictment for securities fraud in the state of Texas, facing 99 years, owes his political career very clearly to Donald Trump as the Attorney General of Texas, now facing a federal investigation for bribery and abuse of power, in which the allegation from his 8 deputies is him misusing his office to do political favors for people upon whom his political career is dependent. You see what I did there? I mean, hopefully that's now very clear. Here's the remarkable thing. The state of Texas changed its election protocols. Trump ally Greg Abbott, Ken Paxton ally Greg Abbott, the Republican governor of Texas, changed the election protocols in Texas in the lead up to the 2020 election as to both early voting and mail-in ballots. Notice that Ken Paxton is not suing the state of Texas. This is, without question, an attempt to overturn the results of this election by selectively attacking certain states for doing something they had every legal right to do, and that Texas has no legal standing, and that's a legal term, to challenge in court. The clear hope here is to use Bush v. Gore as a precedent. Now, how could Bush v. Gore ever be a precedent when the justices in the Bush v. Gore case said this case shall never be precedent? Well, first of all, it can't be, unless you have a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court. 3 of those 6 conservatives were appointed by Donald Trump himself. 4 of those 6 conservatives are considered radical, politically motivated conservatives. You only need 5 votes to win a case. And here's what Bush v. Gore stood for. To the extent it had any integrity whatsoever, which it didn't, but here's what, at least based on the holding of Bush v. Gore, it stood for. In Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court held that if you have different vote counting protocols in 2 different counties within a single state, it's an equal protection violation, according to the Bush v. Gore court, because the voters in those 2 counties in that single state are receiving different treatment for their votes. And under the U.S. Constitution, you have what's called a fundamental right to vote. It's one of the most important rights enshrined in the Constitution. And therefore, with the fundamental right to vote, the Supreme Court applies the highest level of what it calls scrutiny when it does constitutional analysis. That level of scrutiny, which Rudy Giuliani had never heard of before when he was just in court recently, but is taught to constitutional law students in law school on the first day of class, is called strict scrutiny. What that means is that when voting rights are involved, the Supreme Court will require that the state have the best imaginable reason, I'm using layman's terms here, the best imaginable reason for in any way infringing or burdening the right to vote, and it will use the most narrowly tailored means possible to place that burden on the right to vote. Now keep in mind, the Republican Party has been violating this principle in every single state for the last 50 years. They repeatedly put heavy burdens on the right to vote without any evidence of voter fraud whatsoever. So Republicans do not believe in voting rights or in strict scrutiny of voting rights. That's been clear in the jurisprudence and the precedent-laden cases that we've had in election law over the last 50 years. And if some of you may know, I sort of cut my chops on voting rights and election law as a journalist back in the mid-aughts. But that's essentially going to be the claim here of Donald Trump, who believes in burdening voting rights without a strict scrutiny analysis and without any evidence of voter fraud. And Ken Paxton, who believes the same thing, they're now going to claim that the voters of Texas received unfair treatment in the 2020 election because the voters in a completely different state, not a different county, but a different state, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, had different protocols than the voters in Texas. Essentially, what Donald Trump is saying is that there has to be a uniform federal standard for elections in the United States, which is not how America works, and that's not what the Constitution provides, and that's not what the Supreme Court will find in this case, unless the court goes completely lawless, and those 4 justices I mentioned before who are considered radical conservatives are joined by either Neil Gorsuch or John Roberts to make a 5-4 majority. But it's not clear that there's even standing, that's a legal term, for having the right to bring a case before a court. It's not clear that there's even standing for Texas to bring this case in the first place. There is no equal protection violation in different states running their elections differently. That's actually how this country is set up. And this case is corrupt in yet another way, and this is the most stunning one. Donald Trump, right now, as we know, is making decisions about who to give a preemptive pardon to before he leaves office. A preemptive pardon is a pardon given to someone who's under federal investigation or may become under federal investigation but has not been indicted yet. In other words, Ken Paxton, who is currently under FBI investigation for bribery, abuse of power, and other crimes. He desperately wants and needs a pardon from Donald Trump. And we know that Donald Trump is friends with Ken Paxton, calls him regularly. We know that Donald Trump has been calling partisan elections officials around the country to get them to take extraordinary actions contrary to fact and law. We know that Ken Paxton filed this lawsuit using evidence taken directly from Donald Trump's lawyers, without personally verifying it, or vetting it, or investigating it himself whatsoever. If it were to be found, and this doesn't push the boundary of supposition at all, in fact, it's just a continuation of what we already know, if it were to be found that Donald Trump made one of his usual phone calls to Ken Paxton, perhaps, as Ken Paxton likes to joke about this time also when Ken Paxton was in the shower at home, because Ken Paxton likes to joke about getting calls from the president when he's in the shower at home. If Donald Trump, in addition to calling all the other states we know he called to try to interfere in, if he called his friend Ken Paxton and said, I want you to file this lawsuit, at a time when he knows, and he does know, that Ken Paxton is under federal investigation for bribery, abuse of power, and other crimes, we could be looking at an even bigger bribery scandal at the level of the presidency than we have ever seen before, including Russia and Ukraine, and the case that led to the impeachment less than a year ago, and I'll tell you why. Because this would be a bribery case in which a lawsuit of enormous political value to the president and of enormous cost to Texas taxpayers, so it has a clearly defined financial value, was traded for a pardon of Ken Paxton. Not just for money, not just to help Donald Trump do a little bit better in a given state, but to execute an illegal and unconstitutional coup of the democratically elected government of the United States, Joe Biden's government, which 50 states and D.C. have now certified as the rightful next government of the United States. So imagine a bribery scandal where what's at stake is a coup. Arguably, the bribery itself would constitute a seditious conspiracy. I want us to really process that, but I also want you to process something else. Donald Trump, many people believe, there's a lot of reporting on this, that his intention is to pardon himself with a preemptive pardon. No one really thinks that that's going to stand. You really can't find a lawyer who thinks that that is acceptable legally or constitutionally. I mean, those are sort of a subset of one another, but I mean by statute or constitution. Neither statute nor constitution would permit a self-pardon. But here's what no one's mentioned yet, and you're getting just now on this Q&A, I don't think, even if Donald Trump attempts to self-pardon himself, even if that case ends up in litigation for years somewhere down the line, the bribery he may be engaged in right now would not be pardonable, because he would only be executing that bribery at the moment he signed the pardon. Therefore, it would post-date the writing of the pardon and the language of the pardon. And you cannot, even Donald Trump doesn't think you can pardon yourself for future crimes. So Donald Trump may be right now in the midst of committing an impeachable federal felony for which he cannot pardon himself, which he may attempt to pardon Ken Paxton for by giving him a catch-all pardon that handles the pending investigations at the federal level of Ken Paxton for bribery, abuse of power, and other crimes. But he can't pardon himself. And this constitutes the gravest act of bribery we would ever have seen in Donald Trump's life. And boy, that is saying something. Because his way of doing business politically and economically in his Trump Organization activities is bribery. So that's why I say that Donald Trump has just joined the most corrupt lawsuit ever filed in American political history, but so have 17 states. So we now have 18 of our 50 states, 36% of the attorneys general in the United States, which is roughly commensurate with the hardcore Trumpist, cult of personality, anti-democratic, anti-rule of law, anti-free and fair elections crowd. 36% of attorneys general, 36% of states are now trying to overturn the 2020 election based on, in many cases, fraudulent or non-existent evidence that has been rejected by so many state and federal courts that Donald Trump right now is 1 for 52 in lawsuits. And the one case he won was in Pennsylvania, where a court agreed that additional, because there already were Republican vote watchers, vote counting observers, but that one win said that additional GOP observers could be 6 feet away from the counting tables rather than 10 feet away. That was his one win. So no court at the state level or the federal level, no one has acknowledged that there is any evidence whatsoever that would justify overturning this election. And the legal argument is so specious, so absurd, there will probably be calls for Ken Paxton to be disbarred for even filing this lawsuit. Now let me see if I've missed anything. I'm just looking at sort of my notes here. I think I've got pretty much everything down about this lawsuit. So, any questions that you have about anything I've described so far? Because, no lawyer is going to tell you that Donald Trump will win this lawsuit. But I don't think any lawyer is going to tell you that this case isn't a historic disgrace for rule of law in America and for our legal system. So, Kevin asks, how do you see all of this ending? I see Donald Trump losing this case, and the 17 or 18 total states bringing this lawsuit, losing the case. What I fear, just as a possibility, this is not a prediction, it's just a concern I have, and no one has talked about it yet, is that it is very clear that over 100, possibly well over 200, Republicans in the House of Representatives are willing to vote for a fraudulent pro-Trump slate of electors on January 6th, no matter what, no matter who sent those electors. So there's been all this conversation by lawyers who perhaps don't understand, they're not a Trump biographer as I am, they don't understand how far he's willing to go. You hear a lot of lawyers in good faith saying, well, state legislatures can't create a pro-Trump slate of electors in states that Biden won, so don't worry about it. Well, here's what they're not taking into account, and that is that they're dealing with a criminal. They're dealing with actually a large number of criminals. So here's my question to you. What if completely fraudulently created pro-Trump slates of electors, created by, let's say, state Republican parties, or even a county Republican Party in one of these states. To be very clear, you cannot legally create a slate of electors at the county level or at the state party level. It's total nonsense. But here's the question I would ask you. If Donald Trump already knows that over 100, maybe over 200 House Republicans would vote for any pro-Trump slate of electors sent to Washington on January 6th from Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, who cares who creates that slate of electors? They're going to be voted for by House Republicans anyway. So even if Donald Trump loses this case, and just with great vituperation and bile attacks likely virtually all the justices, because I think virtually all the justices, if not all of them, will vote against him in this case if the case fully does get before the Supreme Court. He can, whine all he wants, but he's going to have political allies, possibly in the hundreds in Congress, saying, send us any pro-Trump slate of electors you want, created by any means whatsoever. And because elections are political, quote unquote, remember how they said impeachments are purely political? And a lot of people went along with that and said, oh, it's just political. We don't have to worry about standards of proof or whether, Ron Johnson is allowed to be actually, or Lindsey Graham is allowed to be a juror when in fact they're witnesses in the case. We said, don't worry about it. It's just a political process. Guess what? America taught Donald Trump and Republicans that elections are just a political process, meaning laws don't apply. It's just what you can get away with. So could a fake, wholly illegal, nonsensical, absurd pro-Trump slate created by insane means that have nothing to do with our legal system show up in D.C. on January 6th and get votes from Republicans after, to be very clear, a challenge comes first to these slates of electors in the states I've mentioned? There has to be one congressperson and one senator standing up together opposing a slate of electors from a given state. Could you have Mo Brooks from Alabama, who's already said he'll do this, and one Republican senator, and it won't be hard to find one because most of them are cowards without integrity or a background or belief in the rule of law or democracy or free and fair elections. One GOP senator stands up, says we contest the votes in Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. There'll be 2 hours of debate, but perhaps sitting in a hotel somewhere in D.C. will be a jokey slate of pro-Trump electors from each of those states, and you'll hear 2 hours of debates about how those Republicans want to vote for those electors rather than the real electors. Donald Trump won't win that fight because he doesn't control the House. And for this particular type of vote, who controls the House is what matters. There's a separate situation which goes by delegation vote in the House, and Republicans have more delegations controlled in the House than Democrats. But this would just be a straight vote. Democrats have the House. And frankly, in the Senate, enough Republicans have said they won't go along with this that the Democrats have the votes to block this in the Senate as well, and both houses of Congress would have to uphold it for these jokey slates to be in any way admitted. So that's not going to be successful. What I worry about is there's 2 weeks left before the election. After this nonsense goes down on January 6th, then Steve Cortez, a Trump campaign official that CNN made the mistake of putting on air repeatedly over the last 2 years, recently put out a video on his Twitter feed in which he said the only date that matters for the purposes of the Electoral College is January 20th. I can't believe no one noted that Steve Cortez of the Trump campaign said this. Keep in mind, the final date for determination of electors is January 6th. If someone from the Trump campaign announces that the only date that matters is January 20th, what are they talking about? What continued fight over the Electoral College and the results of the 2020 election could you possibly wage between January 6th and January 20th? I don't know. I can't even imagine. It would obviously be lawless, and I'm a lawyer, and I tend to think in terms of what's legal, so I really don't know. But I will say this. If Donald Trump has just had some jokey pro-Trump slates of electors from several states that would have been enough to make him president be voted for in the Senate by 46 Republican senators and by 200-something, 201 or whatever Republican members of Congress, I worry that Donald Trump, who really doesn't care what Democrats say or think anyway, he doesn't make decisions based on the law or based on what Democrats say or do legally, formally, as part of the official process of the government of the United States, he basically disregards it. How emboldened would he feel to know that the entire Republican Party was on the record as being behind him continuing in the presidency? I don't think that would be successful either. And I want people to understand that. But I do want you to understand how scary, how legitimately scary that would make the days from January 6th to January 20th that Steve Cortes says are so important. We have a lot of Republicans who have claimed that they will come around and say that Biden's the president-elect the moment the Electoral College meets. Now, first of all, that's December 14th. We don't know why they have to wait until December 14th, because 50 states and D.C. have now certified the results, making Joe Biden the president-elect. That's already happened. Every Republican should have come out today saying it's over. As far as I know, virtually no additional Republicans came out and said that. You still have approximately 90% of House Republicans being unwilling to say that Joe Biden won the election, or saying that Trump won it in the case of several of them, a few dozen of them. You have only a handful of senators willing to say that Joe Biden is the president-elect. That should have already changed. It hasn't. Now they're saying it'll change on December 14th. Do you believe that? Do you believe that they have integrity? Do you believe that they believe in rule of law more than their own re-election or Donald Trump as a cult of personality? Do you think that when the Electoral College meets and Joe Biden gets 306 electoral votes and Donald Trump gets 232, that all these Republicans will say, okay, now it's over, when Steve Cortes, a top Trump campaign official, already went on Twitter and said this ain't over until January 20th? I'm not saying these efforts will be successful. They can be unsuccessful and still be historically dangerous and obscene, and something that will be talked about in this country for hundreds of years. And right now, this Texas lawsuit is at the center of that coup attempt. And if they lose this lawsuit, doesn't matter. They'll say the judges were cowards, and they will carry the banner of Ken Paxton's pardon-seeking, fraudulent, corrupt argument into January 6th, and possibly a hotel lobby where a bunch of jokers masquerading as Trump electors from Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania are hanging out and drinking whiskey on Trump's dime, claiming that they're there to vote for the president against the will of the people of those states. I am angry. You should all be angry. Obviously, at this point, we just need to be vigilant, engaged, informed, and understand that they say it with the best of intentions. My peers, my brothers and sisters, at the bar who are fellow lawyers, they look at what's on the books and they say, this can't happen. It can't be successful. And I agree with them. But all of them know, just as I know, having practiced for almost a decade, that cases aren't always decided on the law. There are other considerations that end up coming into play. Even if they don't determine how a case is decided, they create complications that are scary and dangerous and chaotic and out of control. Public policy considerations, financial considerations, political considerations. This case, more than any other, this Texas case, it doesn't really matter that Trump is going to lose it, because he will make use of it either way. And his game plan to destabilize this country can be profoundly successful even if Joe Biden takes the presidency, as I absolutely believe he will, on January 20th of 2021. We can still live in a profoundly destabilized United States. So I see some of you saying what I'm saying. This lawsuit will not be successful. I agree with you. But please, I say this as someone who practiced law for a long time and frankly has been a political journalist even longer. Understand that we have a new theory in the United States. And it showed up during the impeachment, which is the impeachment isn't about law. Donald Trump's actions aren't about law. It's about what you can get away with. That's what we all learned in January. And now the Republican Party believes that elections aren't about votes. They're about what you can get away with. And I don't think they have the juice to get away with what they want to get away with. Unless what they want, and it increasingly seems this is what Donald Trump wants as a matter of revenge, is to bring this democracy to its knees, even with Joe Biden as president. And as someone points out, that's Putin's game plan too. Yeah, that's exactly Putin's game plan. Putin wants chaos. Every intelligence agency reported that Putin's number one goal was simply chaos. It wasn't actually as directed as Donald Trump has to be president or nothing I've done was worthwhile. The Kremlin wanted Donald Trump to be president. But as long as they got chaos, they could live with it either way. Donald Trump wants a second term. But as long as he gets revenge on this country for losing badly, by over 7 million votes, by over 4.5%, like badly losing. And frankly, if the electoral votes were done in a percentage, he lost by 15%. He wants revenge. Vladimir Putin, for reasons I lay out in the Proof Trilogy, wants revenge. But this effort is more dangerous, obviously, than anything that Vladimir Putin does. I mean, we know he's a foreign actor. Vladimir Putin doesn't have a fan club of 74 million people in the United States, does he? So people have been asking about the safe harbor date and its relevance to this suit. So the safe harbor date says that by a certain number of days before the Electoral College meets, 6 days before, states have to certify that they're not going to change their results. They've certified what happened in the state. And as Wolf Blitzer tweeted out just a few hours ago, 50 states and D.C. have now certified the election. So they've all those states have made the safe harbor, meaning they have met the legal requirement to have their electors counted on December 14th. But remember that really what's going on now with respect to my concern about fake electors really has nothing to do with the real electors that will meet on December 14th. But the question that's been asked on me is, asked to me is how about this safe harbor date and its application to the Texas lawsuit? I mean, can you ask the Supreme Court to overturn the results or overturn the certification in any state when the safe harbor provision has been met? Now, in theory, that would be let's say you're a Supreme Court justice who, for nakedly political reasons that are grotesque, inclined to try to find a way to rule for Ken Paxton as he seeks a pardon for his ongoing federal investigation by the FBI for bribery, abuse of power, and other crimes. Well, what you might say if you were a justice is, well, hey, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution is pretty important. And right now there's a tension, according to TENSION, there's tension between the 14th Amendment and this safe harbor provision. What if the 14th Amendment somehow were to come into conflict with the statutory safe harbor provisions? What would win out? Now, what we've already seen in several cases, and this is really the answer to the question that was asked to me, what we've already seen in several cases is courts saying, you knew about this safe harbor provision, this deadline, this December 8th deadline. Hopefully I'm not getting my dates wrong. December 8th or 9th, right? You lose track of time during a pandemic. But this deadline that just passed, you knew about that more than a month ago. And so courts have already said to some Trumpist litigants, you should have filed quicker, because you knew you had to get your case in and get it resolved before the safe harbor deadline passed. So any justice in the Supreme Court who wants to get rid of the Paxton lawsuit and these 17 states that have joined Texas has ample means to do so. I mean, just like a menu of ways to get rid of this case. Standing, the fact that none of these are 14th Amendment violations. But you could also say you should have filed it sooner. Why didn't you file it sooner? The evidence that you've sent forward is evidence that you actually had in your possession, or frankly your friends on the Trump legal team had in their possession for a long period of time. Why didn't you file for emergency injunctive relief a long time ago? Why are you filing it now? In fact, a lot of people think that this lawsuit was filed without any intention of success because it was filed so late. But yeah, that would be a way to get the case out of court. But what if you're Amy Coney Barrett and you owe being on the court to Donald Trump, and you have an incredibly unstable jurisprudence that's primarily motivated by your political beliefs, could you say, sure, they could have filed earlier, but it takes a lot of time to gather evidence of quote-unquote voter fraud, even though there was no voter fraud, and the 14th Amendment is so important that we have to hear the case. We at least have to hear the case. That's how the safe harbor provision, plays in here. Any questions that you have? I'm going to sort of go back up a little bit and see if there were questions that were asked, because I'm sure there were that I missed. But I want to answer your questions about either the Texas suit or, frankly, about anything. The big question certainly was about the safe harbor provision, and hopefully I explained that, but if you have any confusions about the safe harbor provision, the statutory provision, let me know and we can sort of talk about that. John says, maybe wishful thinking, but I think Texas and Trump, and of course now the 17 other states, lose 9-0 with a scathing opinion that reaffirms the rule of law and repudiates Trump and Trumpism. Well, I think that first part is entirely possible, a 9-0 decision that says, no, we're not going to take an action that candidly could lead to mass civil disturbance and violence. Even Clarence Thomas, the most reckless Supreme Court justice I think we've had in the history of this country, would not want that result for the country he lives in, if nothing else for his own, his own peace of mind as an American, and someone who I'm sure believes that he believes in this country. I think even Clarence Thomas wouldn't want to rule for Paxton and Trump in this case. At the most, you want to believe that one of these four radicals on the court might say, look, you can't overturn the results, but there has to be an extension of the statutory deadline so that signature checks can be done, or something like that, some middle ground to say, look, we're not overturning anything, but there should be more election protocols put in place to make sure that, votes weren't wrongly counted, again, even though there's no evidence that they were. That's the only way you would think that it isn't 9-0. But the last part, John, where you say that the decision will repudiate Trump and Trumpism, that's not going to happen. Anyone who is writing on behalf of a unanimous court in this case has to write an opinion that all 9 justices would sign on to. And you're not going to get all 9 justices signing on to a repudiation of Trump and Trumpism. So I wouldn't hold your breath for that. So remember, you can ask me right now about the Texas lawsuit or any questions you have about anything. So someone here asks, do you think that Trump has a decent chance of winning the GOP nomination in 2024? And do you think Republicans will run against him, or will they fall in line? Well, right now, Donald Trump is the leading candidate, according to all state polls and national polls that have been conducted for the Republicans in 2024. The major media investigative reporting from inside the White House says that Donald Trump does plan on announcing a 2024 run. He doesn't actually have to say whether he's going to go through with the run. He can act like he's going to, but he doesn't have to really, double down on this until realistically 2023, the beginning of the 2024 election cycle, sometime in the middle of 2023. So he can sort of mess around for almost 2.5 years saying, I'm running for president, even if he ultimately thinks that he won't. I think that as long as he is actively running, no one will announce that they're running against him, because that would be the end of their political career within the Republican Party. At most, you could get someone who is a never Trumper, who isn't worried about losing Trumpist support, and frankly doesn't see themselves as having any hope of success, and so they announce that they're running. That could happen. But in terms of a serious challenger, a Mike Pence, a Nikki Haley, a Mike Pompeo, a Tom Cotton, obviously a Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump, anyone like that, no, you're not going to see anyone come out saying they want to run against him until they know for sure in 2023 whether he's really running. If he's really running, he'll get the nomination in 2024. Period. End of story. Anyone who tells you otherwise is not a Trump biographer, and hasn't done a lot of research on where the Republican Party is at right now. And it's hard to believe there's anyone in this country who meets that definition, but they'd be wrong if they said he won't get the nomination in 2024. Frankly, they'd be wrong if they said anyone serious was going to run against him if he decides to run. If he decides not to run, he will anoint who he wants to be president, and he will make that decision on the basis of who he's the closest with, because he's going to want access to that person as a lobbyist so that he can make corrupt deals abroad through the Trump organization. So Donald Trump is not going to endorse or anoint anyone who could be president from the Republican Party in 2024 who he does not have a direct line to 24/7 all the time to get that person to act in the way he wants them to act, because he wants to be able to go abroad, and this is consistent with all my research and writing from the last few years in the Proof Trilogy. He wants to be able to go abroad and say, I'm not president, but if I tell you something's going to happen in U.S. foreign policy, it's going to happen. So formulate in your mind the list of people that he has that sort of juice with. And I don't mean they feel beholden to him. I mean that he can call up at any moment and order to have them do things. Right now that list seems pretty long. But if you're imagining anyone like Mitt Romney running for the Republican presidential nomination in 2024, and Romney does show up on all these polls, and polls at under 3% in these polls of leading contenders for 2024 among the Republicans, that's not going to happen because Trump doesn't have that phone line in to Romney where he can get him to do whatever Trump wants him to do. Someone says Mike Pence. Yeah, Mike Pence is absolutely in that group, but it's a pretty small group. So unlike any other time in U.S. history, we actually know 4 years in advance who the nominee will be in 4 years. It will either be Donald Trump or someone Donald Trump selects from a group of about 5 or 6 people, barring something completely unforeseen. Donald Trump is currently incarcerated in a federal facility during the election, and so he can't run. Keep in mind, if for any reason he were incarcerated briefly prior to the election season beginning, he would still run for president. It wouldn't alter anything. As people sometimes point out to me historically, without drawing a direct parallel, do remember that even someone like Hitler was incarcerated before he was democratically elected. So it would really take some doing. Or if Donald Trump, of course, were to pass away from natural causes prior to 2024, then that changes things. Though I still think the Trump family would be in a position to anoint whoever comes next. And frankly, if Donald Trump had passed away of natural causes, you would imagine someone from the Trump family, probably Don Jr., would anoint themselves, or Ivanka. Are you concerned about any Biden cabinet picks, such as Neera Tanden at OMB, who have called for Social Security cuts and pushed austerity? Look, Social Security and austerity are not the focal point of my research, and so I don't want to declaim at length on those topics. But what I have said to people is this will be a moderate, neoliberal, democratic administration in line with much of what we saw in the Obama administration and what the Clinton administration would have been if there had been one. So you shouldn't be too surprised about where things are headed from a policy standpoint, because that's pretty much what we have. I'm not saying anyone has to accept it or be okay with it, but you have to accept that that's what's happening. I'm not talking about Neera Tanden specifically. I'm talking about the general theme, tenor, tone, ideology, perspective, worldview of the Biden administration. We haven't seen any indication of what Republicans claim, which is that Joe Biden is somehow a Trojan horse for some radical agenda. That's laughable on its face. You have to literally know nothing about the Democratic Party, have never heard anything said by a Democrat over the last 10 years, if you think that that's where the party is going to be under this administration, or that's where this administration is going to be under Joe Biden. What do you think all this means for the legal profession? I think Donald Trump has found a way his entire life to, through his actions, through his exploitation of our institutions, degrade everything he touches. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Rick Wilson, I want to say, has a book that says everything Trump touches dies. Do people realize that that includes American democracy? Do people realize that that includes American elections? That that includes our legal system? Everything Trump touches does die. He poisons it. He perverts it. He degrades it out of all recognition of what it formerly was. And so, the legal profession is in a degraded posture. Incredibly, lawyers on the right say that the problem that we have right now is the criminalization of politics. Exactly the opposite problem is what we should be talking about. We have a wholesale decriminalization of politics for the most powerful and rich and influential and visible political figures. You can do anything it now appears, at the federal level. If you are a Republican and you are powerful enough in the eyes of Donald Trump or Donald Trump himself or a member of his family, the Mueller report, in certain respects, by being incomplete as to Volume 1, effectively decriminalized, as did the impeachment trial, which I'm glad it happened. It needed to happen for historical reasons. But the result of the impeachment trial, the result of the Mueller report, was an implicit decriminalization of politics, which is incredibly dangerous. And that's why Republicans tell you that politics has been criminalized and that that's the problem. It's the Karl Rove playbook. Whatever the weakness is in your worldview, whatever you're doing that you don't want people to know about, claim that the opposite is happening. And so what we get is this claim is this claim that politics has been criminalized. Is Trump doing all this so that he doesn't get in trouble with New York City? I do think when Trump announces his 2024 run, and when he tries to position himself as he is right now, as this unjustly mistreated former president who really should be the current president, yes, I think he's trying to make it harder to investigate, prosecute, or incarcerate him. He's trying to make himself too hot to handle as a potential criminal defendant. He already possibly is, even at the state level. But what he's doing now could take it to the point where you have people in the Biden DOJ talking to the Manhattan DA's office or the state attorney general in New York and other states saying, look, you can't prosecute this guy. You can't do it, because if you do, we don't know what's going to happen in this country. So yes, what he's doing right now is a fundraising scam, as I've talked about before. It's a wire fraud scam. He's raised $208 million for his quote-unquote election defense fund, when in fact there's 4% of that money or less is going to any quote-unquote election defense. So it's a fundraising scam. And he can use that money that he is drawing out for travel and other expenses that we would consider personal expenses, as long as he puts a political veneer over them. So yes, it's a fundraising scam. Yes, it's revenge on the United States, which at this point he has contempt for. Yes, it's because he wants to stay in media view and the view of the public, and he wants his adoring fans to continue to adore him. Yes, he wants to set himself up for 2024. Perhaps he is actually delusional enough to think that some of these claims of voter fraud are actually real when they're not, though I suspect a big part of him knows that all of them are fraudulent. But yeah, he also wants to make himself too hot to handle as a criminal defendant at the state or the federal level. And in that sense, it's a very canny decision on his part. And the only cost, if you think about it, is the United States of America. And what price is that to pay for the sake of Donald Trump getting what he wants? What price is it to pay for 500,000 Americans to die of COVID-19, as long as Donald Trump doesn't personally feel he's being blamed for something he doesn't want to take responsibility for? Try not to get too angry here. Looking for your questions here. Do you think there'll be more reporting on the disinformation campaign of doctored images and videos Trump engaged in while he was in the hospital with COVID? Let me say this. The other thing that Donald Trump has done over the last 4 years is he has laid down such a carpet of bullshit and nonsense, excuse my language, that journalism has not been able to keep up. Someone was saying recently that we don't talk about the Muslim ban anymore, one of the most obscene policy gestures in the history of American politics, and we don't talk about it anymore. And it's not. I disagree with those who think it's because we don't care about the religious freedom of Muslims. I think the Democratic Party does care. I think a lot of us care. So many things happen each day that we are constantly spinning. So yes, there was a scandal with the use of doctored images, frankly, I would say in Donald Trump's ad campaigns prior to him getting COVID more than anything else. But when will journalism have time to go back to that? Will they remember that it happened without curatorial journalists and meta-journalists who do the sort of work that I try to do, which is go into the archive and say, hey, this story fell through the cracks. We need to bring it out of the cracks and into the sunlight. We better have a whole generation of curatorial journalists and meta-journalists doing that sort of work, or stories like the doctored imagery, stories like the Muslim ban are going to disappear. And that is so dangerous because we become inured to, inoculated against the shock of actions of that sort, and guess what happens? They happen again. They pop up again for that very reason. Have you read Why We Are Polarized by Ezra Klein? Are you as concerned about our future as he is? I haven't read that book, and so I can't say exactly what his level of concern is. But I'm quite concerned about our future right now at this moment because of the pandemic, because of this ongoing coup attempt, and frankly because of the breakdown in American journalism and our information ecosystem. That's why I'm writing a book on journalism right now. I'm an author, and all I can do is try to research things and write books on them because that's what I do. I'm not a politician. I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm an author. And so I'm writing a book on the crisis in journalism because I think that's probably one of the 3 or 4 key crises that are creating a great danger for the future of the country. So that's the one that I'll be focused on in the coming years. Other questions? Lawyer here, Mandy writes, what role can and should state bars take here? If most of us did half of what these bozos did, we'd be fired and sanctioned. Surely bar censure disincentivizes these Rule 11 nightmares. I mean, Mandy, what I would say is what I was saying previously. As lawyers, you and I understand pretty well what's likely to get us disbarred, what's likely to get us some sort of sanctions short of disbarment. I think most lawyers have a pretty good instinctive sense of that, even if they haven't looked up the prior cases, even if they haven't been reading the rules of professional conduct. You actually have a pretty good instinctive sense, I think most lawyers do, right? But we also know that everything's wonky with these fact patterns. And not just with Donald Trump. Everything's wonky with Joe DeGeneva. I don't know why Joe DeGeneva hasn't been disbarred. I mean, read Proof of Corruption if you're a lawyer and tell me, I just published it in September, and tell me why Joe DeGeneva hasn't been disbarred by the D.C. bar. I have no idea. Except that case would be politically hot to handle for the D.C. bar. And I have to wonder whether these state bar associations want to go down that road, whether they want to get drawn into this. But that's the problem we have in this country. So many people saying, just leave me out of it. Please, Donald Trump, don't hurt my political chances going forward. Or a state bar saying, please, Donald Trump, don't tweet about me because our state bar association is doing just fine and we don't want to wade into whatever your nonsense is. When enough people say, don't involve me, they are fundamentally saying, go ahead. And yeah, that is what state bars are saying to a lot of attorneys, Rudy Giuliani, Joe DeGeneva, Ken Paxton. Whether they know it or not, they are saying go ahead. And I don't need to quote all the famous quotes from the civil rights leader, the only thing that needs to happen is for good people to do nothing, and so on and so forth. They're all those inspirational quotes, and they're all true. We all understand that when enough people do nothing, everyone is effectively saying go ahead. And that's what's happening. Mandy, you say that maybe no one has the balls, excuse my language, that maybe no one has, the gumption to complain. That may be true. I don't think there have been a lot of complaints. I can't remember. Someone just filed with the DC bar regarding DeGeneva saying that Krebs should be executed. I think there was some filing by several well-known lawyers with the D.C. bar, and that was the first time I had seen that happen. So sure, you're right that we don't have a lot of precedent for whistleblowers and do-gooders and just lawyers of conscience bringing these complaints with state bar associations. But I suspect that one of the reasons that hasn't happened is people do not think those cases will go anywhere. They have the same fear that I do. But yeah, I 100% agree. Let's try it. That doesn't mean you don't try it. It's the same thing with impeachment. Everyone understood that it would be hard to get 67 votes in the U.S. Senate. That doesn't mean you don't do it. You know, Mandy, as I know, as all lawyers know, if it's the right thing to do, consistent with equality under law and rule of law and American democracy and the strictures and the rights and privileges of Americans and the strictures of our legal system, you do it. You do it, period. Even if you think it might be folly, you do it because it's the right thing to do. Is there anyone, in your opinion, that could put a stop to Donald Trump? Obviously, I assume we're talking about politically, and no. I want to say otherwise. I want to believe that you can turn this ship of the Republican Party, the Trumpist Party, this cult of personality, that you can turn it around, either on a dime or even over the span of the next 2 years. But no, the ship's too big. It's moving too fast. It's too recklessly and haphazardly driven. Too many people are on board. Too many people have lost all sense whatsoever of where the ship's going or how you steer a ship or why you try to keep people on a ship safe. I'm going to drive this metaphor into the ground. But no, politically, Donald Trump is unstoppable until such time as he passes away of natural causes. Right? Peacefully in his bed at some point years from now of natural causes. Until that point, he will be involved in American politics and he will control the Republican Party. I don't see that changing. I know some very smart people, Asharangappa, Virginia Heffernan, are saying, that they don't think that's the case, and I respect them so much. I don't agree with them on this particular point. I think Donald Trump is in control of one of the two major political parties until such time as he doesn't want to be, and he will always want to be. Are we just going to end up with the GOP, Robert asks, being this insane Trump acolytes, and the Democratic Party will end up becoming akin to Reagan-era Republican ethos and progressives just left in the wind? There is one other possibility. Let me go back to the prior question, and Robert, this will answer your question. I have said before that there's a chance the Republican Party could splinter. Now, I know some of you would say, how could that be? Donald Trump has around 90% support in the Republican Party. Well, I'm sure everyone here understands that if that rest of the Republican Party, if that other 10% creates a party called the New Republican Party or the Grand Old Party or whatever it might be, if that 10% bolts, that stops Donald Trump politically, because you can't win any national elections at the presidential level, and you're going to lose most Senate elections and some House elections that you would otherwise win if the Republican Party is 10% smaller, just 10% smaller. So look, if I were advising Bill Kristol, if I were advising George Conway, and I'm not, and they don't listen to me, and I'm just, talking out of school here, but these never-Trumpers, I worry that they're late postmodernists, meaning, I'm not going to get into detail on cultural theory, but they think in terms of binaries. Either we can take back the Republican Party, or there's no point in doing anything. Bill Kristol and George Conway need to think like metamodernists. You can do something that you know is going to fail, and you will win anyway. Creating a party that is made up of 10% of the Republican Party, that has no chance of ever being elected to any office anywhere in America, is probably the only way to politically stop Donald Trump. Now, I have nothing to do with that effort. I'm a Democrat. But George Conway and Bill Kristol are going to have to become willing, if they want to save this country politically from Donald Trump as a political force, they're going to have to start their own party and never win an election, but fight to get 10% of the party to vote for them, 10% of the Republican Party. Yeah, that's the meta-modern solution to Donald Trump. The legal, peaceful, perfectly procedural, and not just allowed by our system, but encouraged by the Constitution and our values. Start a new party, call it the real Republican Party or whatever you want to call it. I mean, frankly, you should just call it the Republican Party and make Donald Trump call whatever he's doing the Trump Party, because he knows that's what it is and what he wants it to be. But if you do that, Republicans don't win another presidential election for, the next 24 years or more. So you may hear talk of the Republican Party splintering. Not 50-50, but splintering 90-10, which is enough. Coalition government like France and England, well, here's what I would say, Silas. I mean, possibly, though in that situation, the Democrats actually would not have to form a coalition with the new Republican Party because they would just win the elections. But having said that, I am sure that the Democratic Party would try to find a small subset of issues on which they could work with the new Republican Party, like infrastructure and so on, to try to sidestep having to even deal with the Trump Party. Because by that point, remember, the Trump Party will be on record as not believing in American elections and American democracy. The Trump Party will be on record as of January 6th, I believe, of 2021, as supporting a coup of a democratically elected government. So even if you are a Trumpist and you're hearing this, and you think that it's not a coup, they're voting for the election to be overturned because Donald Trump really won. Even if you believe that, you certainly understand that the other side doesn't believe that. And they're probably going to be hesitant to ever work with you again on the basis of that disagreement. So both sides should understand that there could be a radical break in the ability to negotiate and deal with one another if Joe Biden assumes the presidency and virtually all congressional Republicans voted for a coup. Is Joe Biden going to look the other way on that? Is he going to turn the other cheek on that? Is he going to say that's all good? I mean, how long do leaders stay in power who play patsy with coup plotters? I'm not saying, that there's any action that Joe Biden could or would take. This isn't Turkey, but you don't have to play patty cake with the coup plotters. You can try to find some new coalition of people to do business with, and certainly if we had a new Republican Party, that would be such a coalition. By the way, I'm being silly here, right? The new party would probably be called the Lincoln Party. And the Lincoln Party would probably be founded by the members of the Lincoln Project. So, let's say for our hypotheticals, a 10% of the Republican Party fracture that forms something called the Lincoln Party. Yeah, I think that would be a great idea, and I do think that the Democrats would try to work with the Lincoln Party on initiatives that there was agreement on. What do you think Biden-Putin communication will look like in this next era? And I know you asked that because one of the key characters in the 2,500-page proof trilogy of books I published in 2018, and 2019, one of the key characters is Vladimir Putin. So I've done a lot of research on Vladimir Putin, his geopolitical ambitions, his character as a leader, his long-term designs. And I'll say this, he's very different from MBS, right? MBS is a murderous tyrant. This is the ruler of Saudi Arabia, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. But he's enough of a pragmatist to pull back from normalizing relations with Israel because he thought it would look like election interference to Joe Biden, and he was reading the tea leaves and thinking that Joe Biden was going to win. So he's enough of a pragmatist to do that. Vladimir Putin was trying to destroy American democracy in October of 2016, even though he thought Hillary Clinton was likely to win. And she had already been geopolitically effectively an enemy of his. So there's a sort of, I don't want to say recklessness, because I think Putin is generally cautious, but there's a recklessness of ego that Putin has that you don't even see with MBS, which is an incredible thing to say because MBS is a megalomaniac, that causes you to wonder whether Putin can in any way pull back the arc of the U.S.-Russia relationship with Biden. Certainly not from Biden's perspective, unless Vladimir Putin gives deliverables to the Biden administration, meaning it can show that cyber intrusions have almost stopped completely. It can show that its cyber propaganda campaign, its cyber war on U.S. social media is ending or ended. I mean, there are going to have to be metrics for Joe Biden to treat Vladimir Putin as anything other than a sort of hostile force in global geopolitics. And even if there are metrics, it will simply allow meaningful conversations to start between the U.S. and Russia. But Putin's in a pretty deep hole here. So, all right, so I've been going for a while. It's 7:41. Wow, I've been going a really long time. Let me take just one more question. Would you lose some center Democrats to the new Lincoln Party and actually need coalition building between the two? That's a really good point. You might, though I think you have to keep in mind that the Lincoln Party would be generally poorly funded and have no chance of winning any elections ever. They wouldn't actually have anyone sort of elected under the banner of the Lincoln Party. They would so they wouldn't have any representation in Congress, if we're being clear here, because they're only 10% of the Republicans. I mean, how could they win any election? What they might have is some people who are members of the Democratic caucus who see themselves as, in spirit, if not formally, members of the Lincoln Party, and therefore would be heavily influenced by the Lincoln Party platform, by key figures in the Lincoln Party. But there, you wouldn't, quote unquote, lose any Democrats to the Lincoln Party, because that would really end your political career. You know, if you switch from the Democratic Party to the Lincoln Party, well, I guess you don't want to be reelected, and maybe you don't. You know, maybe you're a 2-year representative and you actually decide 6 months in you don't want to run for reelection, so you actually switch to the Lincoln Party, and historically you become the first Lincoln Party congressman or congresswoman for the next 18 months of your term. Yeah, that's possible, but not sort of beyond that. All right, I went really long, and I admit that I monologued for a lot of that, and I apologize, because the Texas lawsuit's just so complex. There's so much I wanted to say about it. I really appreciate everyone tuning in. I really appreciate the great questions. Thank you so much. I will save this so it'll be on my Instagram feed. I hope if you want to, your call to tell other people that these talks, I've now had 4 of them, are on my Instagram feed, on Instagram at Seth.Abramson. And if you're on Instagram and you don't follow me on Twitter and you're interested in what I've been talking about, you can follow me at Seth Abramson on Twitter. But again, whatever you think best. Thank you, everyone, and I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, take care. Have a great night.